The radio crackled to life at 0430 hours on a cold March morning in the mountains of Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez was cleaning her rifle when the urgent message came through. A group of Taliban fighters had taken control of a strategic outpost overlooking the main supply route, and they had hostages, 3 American aid workers who had been delivering medical supplies to a nearby village. Elena had been serving with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 3 years, but she was still fighting to prove herself in a world dominated by men. At 26, she was one of only a handful of female snipers in active combat zones. Her record was impressive, 43 confirmed kills over 2 deployments, but there were always whispers in the barracks. Some said she was lucky. Others claimed she cracked under pressure during the most critical moments. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell called an emergency briefing at 500. The situation was grim. Intelligence suggested that at least 12 heavily armed fighters had fortified themselves in the old Soviet-era bunker complex on Ridge 487. The position was nearly impregnable, with clear sight lines in every direction. Any direct assault would result in massive casualties, and the hostages would likely be executed at the first sign of an attack. "We need options, people," Mitchell said, spreading the tactical map across the table. "This isn't just about the hostages. That position controls our entire supply line. If we can't move convoys through that valley, we're looking at a logistics nightmare for the next 6 months." Elena studied the map carefully. The bunker sat on a rocky outcrop approximately 2.1 miles from the nearest position, where a sniper could set up with any hope of making an effective shot. In her 3 years of service, the longest confirmed kill she had made was 1.7 miles, a shot that had taken her 4 attempts and nearly perfect weather conditions. "What about air support?" asked Captain Stevens, the company's executive officer. "Negative," Mitchell replied. "Weather reports show a major storm system moving in. We'll have maybe 18 hours of clear skies, then we're looking at 3 days of heavy snow and winds. Plus, the hostages are being held in the lower levels of the bunker. Any airstrike risks bringing the whole structure down on them." Elena cleared her throat. "Sir, I could take a position on Hill 342. It's about 2 miles out, but the angle would be clear." The room fell silent. Major Thompson, her direct superior, shook his head. "Rodriguez, that's an impossible shot. Even for our best snipers, 2 miles is pushing the absolute limits of what's achievable. And in these conditions, the wind alone will throw off your calculations by dozens of feet." "With respect, sir," Elena responded, "I've been studying the ballistics data for months. The new ammunition we received last week has better consistency at extreme range, and Hill 342 has a natural windbreak that should minimize the environmental factors." Thompson's face reddened. "This isn't a training exercise, Sergeant. We're talking about American lives. 1 missed shot and those hostages are dead." Elena felt the familiar burn of frustration. She had heard this same argument countless times. Too risky. Too difficult. Not proven under pressure. But she knew her capabilities better than anyone in that room. Her grandfather had been a sniper in Vietnam, and her father had served as a designated marksman in the Gulf War. Precision shooting wasn't just her job, it was in her blood. "What's your proposal, Rodriguez?" Colonel Mitchell asked, ignoring Thompson's objections. "Give me 12 hours to set up and range the target. I'll need Corporal Martinez as my spotter and Sergeant Chen to help with calculations. If I can't achieve a clean shot within the first 24 hours, we go with the assault plan." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. Elena could see the doubt in his eyes, but also the recognition that they had limited options. The assault plan would work eventually, but it would cost lives, possibly dozens of them. "The weather window is closing fast," he said finally. "You've got 18 hours before the storm hits. After that, we're locked into whatever position we're in for the next 3 days." As the briefing broke up, Elena gathered her gear and began the mental preparations she had learned to rely on. Every successful shot began long before she pulled the trigger. It started with visualization, calculating not just the ballistics, but the environmental factors, the target's likely behavior patterns, and most importantly, managing her own stress response. She had learned early in her career that the difference between good snipers and great ones wasn't just marksmanship. It was the ability to control every variable within reach and adapt to those beyond control. The longest shots required patience measured in hours, sometimes days. They demanded the ability to remain motionless in uncomfortable positions while maintaining absolute focus on a target that might appear for only seconds. But as Elena packed her rifle case and prepared for the mission, she could hear the whispered conversations behind her. The same conversations that had followed her throughout her career. Questions about whether she had the mental toughness for the most critical moments. Doubts about whether a woman could handle the psychological pressure of knowing that American lives hung in the balance. She had faced these doubts before, but never with stakes this high. The upcoming shot wouldn't just determine the fate of 3 hostages, it would define her career and potentially change how the military viewed women in combat roles. The helicopter flight to the base of Hill 342 took 23 minutes. Elena used every second to review the intelligence reports and weather data. The Taliban fighters had been in position for 6 hours, and their behavior patterns were becoming predictable. They rotated guards every 4 hours and seemed most active during the early morning and late afternoon periods. As the helicopter touched down, Elena felt the familiar calm that always preceded her most challenging shots. The doubt and pressure fell away, replaced by the methodical focus that had made her one of the most effective snipers in the regiment. She had 18 hours to prove that she could deliver when it mattered most. The climb up Hill 342 would take 4 hours in the darkness, leaving her with 14 hours to set up, range the target, and wait for the perfect shot. Somewhere in those calculations lay the difference between success and failure, between proving her critics wrong and confirming their worst fears about her ability to perform under pressure. The climb up Hill 342 proved more treacherous than the reconnaissance photos had suggested. Loose shale and hidden crevices slowed their progress, and by the time Elena reached the designated shooting position, she had only 12 hours of daylight remaining before the storm arrived. Corporal Martinez, her spotter, was breathing heavily as he set up the observation equipment. Despite being in excellent physical condition, the 4-hour climb with full gear had pushed both of them to their limits. Elena forced herself to ignore the fatigue and began the meticulous process of preparing her position. The Barrett M107A1 rifle had been her companion for 2 years. She knew every aspect of its performance, how the barrel heated up after multiple shots, how the scope adjusted in different temperatures, how the bipod needed to be positioned for maximum stability. At 2.1 miles, she would be pushing the rifle beyond its optimal effective range, but she had modified the ammunition load specifically for this type of shot. "Wind speed is variable," Martinez reported, studying the readings from his handheld weather station. 7 to 12 miles per hour from the northwest, but it's gusting up to 18 in some spots. Elena nodded, making notes in her range book. Wind was the enemy of long-range precision. At 2 miles, even a slight breeze could push a bullet several feet off target. She would need to time her shot perfectly, waiting for a momentary calm between gusts. The bunker complex came into clear view through her scope. The Soviet-built structure was exactly as described in the intelligence briefings. Concrete walls thick enough to withstand artillery strikes, narrow windows that provided excellent defensive positions, and multiple levels connected by reinforced stairwells. The target area where she expected to find enemy movement was a small platform near the main entrance, approximately 6 feet wide by 10 feet long. "Range confirmed at 3,287 meters, Martinez said, checking his calculations against the laser rangefinder. "Elevation difference is 847 feet. Temperature is dropping steadily." Elena made the adjustments to her scope, compensating for bullet drop over the extreme distance. At this range, gravity would pull her bullet down more than 40 feet from its initial trajectory. She also had to account for the Coriolis effect. The rotation of the Earth itself would influence the bullet's path over the 8 seconds it would take to reach the target. Hours passed in complete silence. Elena remained motionless behind her rifle, watching the bunker through her scope, while Martinez monitored communications and weather conditions. The Taliban fighters showed themselves sporadically, usually just shadows moving past the narrow windows. None presented a clear shot. At noon, her radio crackled with an update from command. "Overwatch, this is base. Hostage status unchanged. Weather reports confirm storm arrival in 6 hours. How's your window looking?" Elena keyed her microphone without taking her eye from the scope. "Base, this is Overwatch. No clear shot opportunities yet. Target behavior is predictable, but limited exposure time. Weather conditions are manageable for now." "Copy that. Be advised, assault teams are moving into preliminary positions. If you don't have a shot by 1600 hours, we're going to have to consider alternatives." The pressure was building. Elena could hear it in the colonel's voice and feel it in the tension of her own muscles. 4 hours wasn't much time when waiting for the perfect shot, especially when that shot needed to be absolutely perfect on the first attempt. Martinez shifted position slightly and winced. "My back's starting to lock up," he whispered. "How do you stay so still for this long?" "Practice," Elena replied quietly. "And stubbornness." She had spent countless hours in training scenarios, learning to control not just her breathing and trigger finger, but every muscle in her body. The slightest movement could throw off a shot at this distance. Her rifle had to remain perfectly stable from the moment she acquired the target until the bullet reached its destination. At 14:30 hours, activity around the bunker increased dramatically. Through her scope, Elena could see figures moving between the upper and lower levels. Intelligence suggested the hostages were being held in the basement area, while the fighters maintained their watch positions on the upper floors. "Movement on the main platform," Martinez reported. 2 individuals armed with AK-47s. Distance to center of platform is 3,284 meters. Elena tracked the figures through her scope. They were too far away to identify clearly, but their movement patterns and equipment matched the Taliban fighters described in the briefings. One of them stepped to the edge of the platform and raised what appeared to be binoculars, scanning the surrounding hills. For a brief moment, he stood perfectly still, silhouetted against the concrete wall behind him. Elena's crosshairs settled on his center mass. Her finger found the trigger, and she began the breathing sequence that preceded every shot. Inhale slowly, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze. A gust of wind rattled the sparse vegetation around her position. Elena eased off the trigger and watched through her scope as dust swirled across the bunker platform. The wind indicator on Martinez's equipment showed gusts up to 22 miles per hour. "No shot," she whispered. "Wind's too variable." The fighter with the binoculars moved back into the bunker interior, and the opportunity vanished. Elena remained in position, knowing that patience was often the difference between success and failure at these extreme distances. By 1500 hours, the weather was deteriorating rapidly. Cloud cover was building from the west, and the temperature had dropped 8 degrees in the past hour. Elena could feel the cold seeping through her gear, but she forced herself to ignore the discomfort. "Base, this is Overwatch. Weather conditions are becoming marginal, wind speeds increasing and cloud cover building. Copy, Overwatch. Be advised, assault teams are requesting permission to move to final positions. What's your assessment of shot probability?" Elena considered her response carefully. The honest answer was that her chances were decreasing with each passing hour as weather conditions worsened. But she also knew that a direct assault would likely result in casualties on both sides, and the hostage's survival was far from guaranteed. "Base, I need another hour. Target patterns suggest increased activity around 1600 hours. If I don't have a clear shot by then, you can authorize the assault." Martinez gave her a questioning look. She was buying time, hoping that the Taliban fighters would follow the routine they had established earlier in the day. Intelligence suggested they conducted a security check of the perimeter every 4 hours, which would put the next one right at 1600. "Roger, Overwatch. You have until 1600 hours." As the minutes ticked by, Elena could feel the weight of the decision she was making. Every person involved in this operation, from the assault teams positioning themselves around the bunker to the helicopter pilots standing by for casualty evacuation, was depending on her ability to deliver when it mattered most. At 15:47 hours, her patience was rewarded. 3 figures emerged onto the main platform, moving with the systematic precision of a security patrol. Elena could see through her scope that one of them was carrying a radio and appeared to be the squad leader. "Multiple targets on platform," Martinez whispered. "Lead figure appears to be directing the others." Elena centered her crosshairs on the lead figure and began her final preparations. This was the shot she had been waiting for: clear target, stable position, and a brief window of opportunity before the storm arrived. But as she settled into her shooting position, she could feel the weight of all the doubts that had followed her throughout her career. The radio crackled one final time. "Overwatch, this is base. Stormfront is 12 minutes out. This is your last window." Elena's finger moved to the trigger as she made the final calculations that would determine whether she could prove her critics wrong or confirm their worst fears about her ability to perform under ultimate pressure. Elena's world narrowed to the circle of her scope. The lead Taliban fighter stood motionless for 3 seconds, examining something in his hands. Through the magnification, she could see he was holding what appeared to be a satellite phone, likely communicating with other cells about their position and the hostages. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 2, out through the mouth for 6. Her heart rate, elevated from hours of tension, began to settle into the controlled pattern that preceded every successful shot. Martinez's voice was barely audible. "Wind speed dropping, 8 miles per hour steady from the northwest, humidity rising with the incoming storm front." Elena made micro-adjustments to her scope, compensating for the changing atmospheric conditions. The approaching storm was actually working in her favor now. The temperature drop was making the air denser, which would help stabilize the bullet's flight path. But she had perhaps 90 seconds before the wind patterns became too chaotic for an accurate shot. The Taliban leader lowered the satellite phone and turned slightly, presenting a better angle. Elena could see his profile clearly now: bearded, wearing an olive-green military jacket, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who believed his position was unassailable. In his arrogance, he had no idea that death was approaching at 2,800 feet per second from over 2 miles away. "Range 3,084 meters confirmed," Martinez whispered. "Target is stationary. Wind holding steady." Elena's finger found the trigger's sweet spot, that precise point where just a few more ounces of pressure would release the firing pin. Her crosshairs were centered on the target's upper chest, accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, and the slight upward angle of the shot. After 8 seconds of flight time, the bullet would arrive approximately 18 inches lower and 6 inches to the right of where she was currently aiming. The calculations were complex, but Elena had internalized them through years of practice. Distance, elevation, wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth. All of these factors combined to create a flight path that existed only in her mind and in the ballistic computer she had learned to trust completely. Time seemed to slow as Elena entered the zone that separated elite snipers from merely good ones. Her peripheral vision faded until only the target existed. The cold mountain air, the uncomfortable position, the pressure of the mission. Everything disappeared except the crosshairs and the figure standing 3,284 meters away. Inhale, hold. The Taliban leader raised his hand to shield his eyes from the afternoon sun, scanning the hills where he suspected enemy forces might be positioned. His gaze swept across the area where Elena lay hidden, but the camouflage and distance made her invisible. Exhale halfway. Hold. Elena's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger. The Barrett M107A1 had a crisp break point at exactly 4 pounds, 2 ounces. She was now at 3 pounds, 15 ounces. The Taliban leader turned slightly, presenting an even better target angle. Elena could see the outline of body armor under his jacket, but her aim point was calculated to strike just above the protective vest. At this distance, the .50 caliber bullet would retain enough energy to be instantly lethal regardless of protection. 4 pounds of pressure, 4 pounds, 1 ounce. The rifle fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the valley. Elena absorbed the massive recoil, keeping her scope centered on the target area through years of trained muscle memory. The muzzle blast scattered loose rocks around her position, and a cloud of dust obscured her view for a fraction of a second. Through her scope, Elena watched the bullet's trajectory play out in real time. 8 seconds at this distance, enough time for doubt to creep in, for wind to change, for the target to move. She had made shots like this in training, but never with American lives hanging in the balance. At exactly 8.3 seconds after the rifle fired, the Taliban leader's chest exploded in a spray of blood and fabric. The massive .50 caliber bullet struck with the force of a sledgehammer, spinning him around and dropping him instantly to the concrete platform. The satellite phone flew from his hands and shattered against the bunker wall. "Hit confirmed," Martinez shouted into his radio. "Target down! I repeat, target down!" The other 2 Taliban fighters on the platform froze for a moment, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The sound of Elena's rifle shot was still echoing through the valley, but from their position over 2 miles away, it would have seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elena was already working the bolt action, chambering another round. Through her scope, she could see the remaining fighters scrambling for cover, shouting orders she couldn't hear. One of them grabbed the fallen leader's weapon and began firing blindly in the direction he thought the shot had come from, nearly a quarter mile off target. "Base, this is Overwatch. Target eliminated. Recommend immediate assault while remaining hostiles are disorganized." Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio with barely controlled excitement. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. Assault teams are moving now. Maintain Overwatch and provide support as needed." Elena kept her rifle trained on the bunker complex, ready to take follow-up shots if necessary. Through her scope, she could see chaos erupting inside the structure. Figures ran between windows, and she could hear the distant sound of shouting and gunfire from within the building itself. The assault teams moved with precision, using the confusion created by Elena's shot to breach the bunker's outer defenses. Apache helicopters appeared from behind the ridgeline, adding their firepower to suppress any remaining resistance. Within 17 minutes, it was over. The remaining Taliban fighters either surrendered or were eliminated during the assault. Most importantly, all 3 American hostages were recovered alive and unharmed. The medical aid workers had been held in the bunker's basement, exactly where intelligence had predicted. As Elena began the process of packing her equipment, Martinez was practically bouncing with excitement. "Did you see that shot? 2.1 miles, in changing wind conditions. That's got to be some kind of record." Elena allowed herself a small smile as she carefully cleaned and secured her rifle. The shot had been technically perfect, but more importantly, it had achieved the mission objective with minimal casualties. The Taliban leader had been the key to the entire operation. His elimination had demoralized the other fighters and allowed the assault teams to succeed with minimal resistance. The extraction helicopter arrived 37 minutes later, just as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall from the approaching storm. As they flew back to base, Elena could see the bunker complex below, now occupied by American forces who would hold the position until permanent security could be established. Back at the forward operating base, word of Elena's shot had already spread through the entire regiment. The same soldiers who had questioned her ability to perform under pressure were now asking detailed questions about her technique and equipment modifications. Major Thompson, who had openly doubted her capabilities just 18 hours earlier, was the first to congratulate her as she stepped off the helicopter. "Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand, "that was absolutely incredible shooting. I owe you an apology." Elena shook his hand but kept her response simple. "Just doing my job, sir." Colonel Mitchell was waiting in the operations center with a full debrief team. The successful mission would be analyzed from every angle. Not just Elena's shot, but the entire operation from planning to execution. Her rifle and scope would be examined to verify the ballistic calculations, and her range book would become part of the official record. "Rodriguez," the colonel said as she entered the briefing room, "I've been in the Army for 23 years, and I've never seen a shot like that under those conditions. You've not only saved 3 American lives today, you've proven that excellence knows no gender boundaries." As Elena began the detailed debrief process, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every doubt, every question about her ability to perform under pressure, every whispered conversation about whether women belonged in combat roles, all of it had been answered by a single, perfectly placed bullet fired across 2.1 miles of mountain terrain. The shot would become legendary within special operations communities, studied and analyzed for years to come. But for Elena, it represented something more personal, proof that dedication, preparation, and skill could overcome any prejudice or doubt. She had not only silenced her critics, she had earned their respect through performance when it mattered most. 3 months later, Elena Rodriguez was promoted to Sergeant First Class and selected for the Army's Advanced Sniper Instructor course. Her 2.1-mile shot remained unmatched in combat conditions, and she would go on to train the next generation of precision marksmen who would carry on the tradition of excellence under pressure. The Taliban leader she had eliminated was later identified as a high-value target who had been responsible for coordinating attacks across the entire region. His death disrupted enemy operations for months and saved countless lives beyond just the 3 hostages recovered that day. Elena never forgot the lesson of Hill 342, that the most important shot isn't the longest or the most technically difficult, but the one that matters most when lives hang in the balance, and failure is not an option.